Hello, everyone. Welcome to Battle Walks. Thank you for joining us for the third part in our quite epic trek across the Owen Stanleys on the Kokoda Track. There's been a great response to the first two episodes. If you haven't listened to those, please go back and do so because it's been a pretty special journey so far, and I'm sure today it will continue to be a very special journey. Joining me is my very special guest host. It's David Howell. Dave, welcome back on Kokoda.
Great to be back, Matt.
It's been exciting so far, mate. I've really enjoyed it this up to this point, and we've had some excellent feedback. A lot of people have emailed in and sent messages on Twitter and Facebook just saying that it's been quite a special journey. They've enjoyed exploring a part of the world that I think a lot of people wouldn't see themselves actually walking. So it's been great, mate. So thank you so much for your input. It's the final part of the journey today, the final part of the story.
It is, and look, it has been good sitting here and reminiscing, I guess, placing myself back on the Kokoda Track and walking up and down the hills, but doing it from the comfort of my armchair.
When are you actually heading back to the track, mate?
I'll be back in July. We've got a trip running in conjunction with the 39th Battalion Association, and we'll be taking some school kids who won a scholarship through the association and exploring for them the first overseas trip, but in the first battlefield they've been to. So it's exciting.
Fantastic.
And this is the 80th anniversary year.
It's always great when you get over there with school groups. You get a whole new perspective because I always think that young people cop a bit too much of a bagging these days from us older generations. But when it comes to look, I'm sure there are young people that need to have a think about how they're living their lives. But I've got to say, from the perspective of the ones that I take to battlefields, from the ones that I see participating in Anzac Day services, and particularly these ones that win scholarships and places on history tours, they're pretty impressive, and I think the future is in safe hands.
Indeed, and when you get young people who are enthusiastic, they want to learn. They're coming across these subjects, usually for the first time, usually for the first time in the sense that they want to have more of an in-depth knowledge. And I think that spurs me on as well, because if people are eager and keen to learn more, then you have to up your game and answer some of the difficult questions. And sometimes there's questions that I perhaps may not know the answer for. So it challenges me as it challenges them. So I really get a kick out of it.
And we've got to remember as well, those of us in our 40s, we no longer represent the veterans that we're talking about. The men, the men and women who went off and fought, typically much younger than I am today, and so it's always good to get a perspective from a younger generation about what these sorts of things mean to them.
Indeed.
Well, let's carry on, mate. Third and final part of our Kokoda trek. It's been grueling. There's been laughter. There's been tears. We've hung in there together. Today, the last bit of the track. So why don't you give us an overview of what we're going to cover on the trek today?
Well, today we are just over the halfway mark, and we're going to cover the next major battlefield going on the direction north-south, which is Brigade Hill. And then, of course, we're going to make our way along to Ioribaiwa Ridge, which is the furthest extent of the Japanese advance. Then we have Imita Ridge. And we've still got one final hill to climb, which is Owers Corner, where we will be picked up on the bus to take us back to the hotel, but of course making a very, very important stop on the way home, so to speak, which is, of course, Bomana War Cemetery, the last resting place of many of these people that we've spoken about who died during the Kokoda campaign.
Well, it's going to be a wonderful adventure, mate. I think it's going to be confronting in some places, but we finished up in Efogi last time, I believe. We camped for the night. We'd enjoyed a hearty home-cooked meal around the campfire. No doubt a sing-along with David. I don't know if you got your guitar out, but we've had an enjoyable evening in Efogi. And where to now?
Where to now? Well, we are in the shadow at Efogi. We've seen the sign that has the halfway mark, so that kind of gives people it's going to be a double-edged sword, gives you relief that we've made it halfway, but of course you've still got what you've just walked in front of you. In the overshadowing, as I should say, is of course Brigade Hill. So we have slept with this dominating feature behind us that we are setting off, and it's always good to camp the night before going up to Brigade Hill, because I hate to do it the other way where you have lunch and you've got a full stomach and you're just about to climb up this massive feature. And also from the northern side of it, it's probably not as grueling as if you were going the other direction. So that's where we are. We're at Efogi. We've had a good sleep. We've got our packs on, and we're about to walk off into the jungle again and to climb this mission ridge up to Brigade Hill.
So tell us about this ground. What happened here in 1942?
So this is I guess, for the Australian withdrawal, it's the second major battle. Ioribaiwa being the first that involves the 21st Brigade, and Brigade Hill is basically named after. It's where the headquarters of Brigadier Arnold Potts, who was the commander of the 21st Brigade, who was commanding the 2nd 14th and the 2nd 16th, and also the 2nd 27th battalions. And originally, it was Mission Hill is another word for it. There was a 7-day Adventist mission hut. Was the only distinguishing feature on the hill. So the ridge going up to it, you'll read in history books, or some people will, like myself, would refer to it as the hill itself you're climbing, is Mission Ridge. And Brigadier Potts, as I said, his brigade headquarters was on top of the saddle, and so that became known as Brigade Hill. So, in terms of the history, this is a place where Brigadier Potts was ordered by his commander, which was General Rowell, to stop retreating and make a stand against the Japanese. By now, the Japanese had obviously cleared the Australians from their stand at Ioribaiwa, had chased them back through Myola, the dry lake beds of Myola 1, Myola 2, which were very important. These are the places that Brigadier Potts had wanted his supplies to be ready for his battle at Ioribaiwa, where he relieved the 30th Brigade guys of the 39th and of course, the New South Wales 53rd Battalion. So they've lost all that. They are with wounded. They are, low on supplies. Anything the Australians couldn't carry was either buried, sabotaged, etc., to deny the Japanese getting those supplies. And he's made it to this high ground. Of course, remember, infantry soldiers, got to dominate the high ground, and this is exactly the place where they can do it. And Brigadier Potts now has something that he hadn't had before. He's had one of his battalions, that being the South Australians, the 2nd 27th Battalion, released from Port Moresby. They'd previously been left out of battle. They were held in reserve back in Port Moresby because there was fear of the Japanese breaking through at Milne Bay. As we know from history, Milne Bay didn't go well for the Japanese. So once that fear is now alleviated because the Japanese didn't break through, Brigadier Potts is able to have this fresh battalion, if you will, come in. Unfortunately, he's not at his full brigade strength because, of course, the 2nd 14th and the 2nd 16th had that bloody battle at Ioribaiwa, and their numbers aren't what they should be. They are in a state of, they've got lots of wounded, they've got fatigue. Men have been out here now fighting in the jungles, low on supplies, having to fight this fighting withdrawal. And although he's got this new battalion, it's still not in the Australians' favour, if you will.
So, what are we seeing today, David, as we approach this imposing hill?
So the first thing we do is we walk out of the village of Efogi. There's a clear a clearing, if you will, which is a square of the village, and that sort of tapers down. And it's a very nice little village in the sense that you've got where the track goes now. You've got this wonderful airstrip, which is the Efogi airstrip, and it sort of just disappears off into the mountains. And then, of course, you've got this imposing mission ridge that we're about to climb. The place that we actually climb here is not the exact same spot where we start off as what would have been in 1942, but it's relatively close. In fact, it parallels Mission Ridge. And during the war, when Brigadier Potts had the 2nd 27th guys released from Moresby, when they came to occupy those positions, of course, Brigadier Potts thought, they're the fresh guys. They were going to put up the front, and they were put up in the front, but initially they were too far down off the hill. In fact, I've been to the spot where we've found plenty of relics, if you will, left over from the 2nd 20, like unfired 303 ammunition there, where they dug in. And they were dug in down the bottom of the hill, and later on Brigadier Potts realised this is not the case, and he ordered their commander to bring them further back up onto Brigade Hill proper. And we're going to probably do about an hour and a half, maybe an hour, depending on how fit we're feeling, and we're going to cross over this spot where the 2nd 27th were dug in.
How much of a connection are you feeling, David, with 1942 as you walk through this part of the track?
The great thing about this part of the trek is you have open spaces with vistas that you can see, and when you're climbing up towards Brigade Hill and you look back, you're looking down at where Efogi South, the larger Efogi, is now, and you're seeing the airstrip, and you're seeing, looking up towards Kargi, the village of Kargi up on the hill. You can actually see, you can put it in perspective. And this is the spot where, if you turn a page in a history book that talks about this, you'll almost certainly read about the Japanese lantern parade. And I mentioned it briefly in the last podcast. And this is where the Australians could actually see the Japanese, who had now were reorganising themselves and preparing for their assault on Brigade Hill. And the lantern parade, they literally had lanterns, and the Australians could see them coming down the side of the mountain. They couldn't engage them. They didn't really have their weapon systems, weren't able to go out to that range, but they could see them because, again, there's this open vista. So if you're there now, here in the present, you are climbing up and you're looking down over to where the Japanese were coming down. And I just always say to people, imagine being one of those soldiers, especially the fresh 2nd 27th guys who had been in garrison duty at Port Moresby. They hadn't been involved in the fighting in New Guinea at this stage, and they've dug themselves in, and on the horizon, if you will, they could see this lantern parade zigzagging down, knowing that these guys are coming to force you off your position. Well, that's their aim. So, real big, strong connection in this part of the trek.
And do the young people on the track and the people you're leading, do they feel that connection with the history, or is it all a bit difficult for them to imagine?
I think by this stage, it becomes a bit more clearer because they get an understanding, in the sense of something that is really real and tangible, and that is that they've just walked over half the Kokoda Track now. They understand that it is tough and it is challenging, and as the history and the stories, especially around the campfire, has been developed, people are starting now to get an understanding that the Australian soldier, we shouldn't just get into camp at night and kick your boots off and have popcorn and a nice big fire to get warm and do. You had to do stuff that infantry soldiers would do: dig in, do your stand twos, do all the stuff that you need to do to survive in that environment. Whilst at any moment you could come under attack from the enemy. So, if this part for me, I think, if you're heading north south, it really comes home. If you're on the trek, it really comes home that this is not. The history pages come alive. This is not an easy feat by even today's standards with the walking, let alone having to fight, a godforsaken battle in an inhospitable place. So, yeah, it really brings it home to people.
So what's next after Brigade Hill?
Well, we're not quite to Brigade Hill. We're climbing up the side of it, and when you reach the actual saddle or the summit, if you will, there's one last push up to a grassy knoll. I call it the grassy knoll. And when you get up on the top of it, there's a plaque, and you're looking out. You're able to see on the other side. You're actually able to see towards where we're going. It's a long way in the distance, but you get, again, to put your trek in perspective, because this is really the first time that you have been able to stand in a central point and be able to look back from where you came and to where you're going. And on top of Brigade Hill now, there is a mess hut. There is a plaque that was put in the early 90s there. There's an area, a cleared area, and there's also, toilets and running water. You can actually hear this pipe of water getting, closer and closer as you climb up that knoll. And once you're on top of it, as I said, everything starts to become in perspective. And what we're going to do is we have a service. We have a service, little services along the way, but in particular being Brigade Hill as a major feature. That's what we do. And we get the Papuan guys that are with us, the New Guinea guys with us. They all join, and we go around that plaque with this magnificent vista behind us, and we read a few poems, read a few accounts of what happened, and we recite the ode have a minute's silence, and it is a very, very sombre occasion, on par with the occasion we would have had it previously at the Ioribaiwa Memorial.
I can imagine, mate. What happens after we finish there and move on?
So after we have a look around at Brigade Hill, we talk about those units that fought there. And I must just mention one of the things that stand out, of course, is the bayonet charge at the saddle. There were men like Brenton Langridge, men like Charlie McLachlan, who had been a hero at Ioribaiwa. These are guys who pretty much take off their dog tags, hand their paybooks over. They are, because it doesn't go well. If you haven't guessed by now, it doesn't go well for the Australians. And after a couple of days in early September, these guys get pushed off. The Australians get pushed off this feature, which is, well, Brigadier Potts would later be dismissed from his command. Probably, it was undeserved, but nonetheless, the Japanese did manage to go past the halfway mark, and you can't help but relay these stories of Charlie McLachlan, Brenton Langridge taking off their paybooks, handing over their dog tags, knowing that they had to fight an action to stop the Japanese, even only momentarily, so that the wounded, so the rest of Potts's 21st Brigade could make their escape. In fact, Bert Kienzle, now known as the architect of Kokoda, had to blaze another trek, the second 27th that we spoke about earlier on. They actually get cut off and get lost. They're known as the Lost Battalion. I think it's 2 weeks they're lost out in the bush, paralleling other tracks, trying to make their way back to the Australian lines. But men literally sacrifice themselves in order to allow for their mates to escape, in effect. Yeah. So it's moving stuff. And after we do all that at Brigade Hill, we've got a big drop down to another river. I prefer going down this way of Brigade Hill than coming up it, but it is steep, it's muddy, it's slippery, and it goes on forever. And everyone, whether you're going up it or down it, have a sigh of relief when you get to the bottom. And when we finally get to the bottom, and I should say along the way, you can see a lookout that looks out to Minari, which is the next village that we're going to, and you can see the airstrip. Obviously, there's big open areas. And we cross the creek at the bottom, and then just when we think the climbing is behind us, you get a bit of a wake-up call, because you've got a half an hour or so climb up into the village onto the airstrip. And it's a nice open area. By now, we've left Efogi. This has taken most of the morning. Had morning tea either on Brigade Hill or coming down off the side of it, and we're punching on up through Minari Village, which is a big village. It's a similar size to, I guess, to Efogi, and it's an opportunity for the kids will come out again. It's an opportunity to turn around and look back at Brigade Hill and realise how big a feature it is. It's also an opportunity to stand relatively in the same spot where the Damien Parra footage from Kokoda Frontline was taken, where Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Honor of the 39th Battalion famously addresses his men. That all happens in this area, and after we do that, we've got another mountain, of course, to climb up through a gap. Always, yes, up in the gap. And we're by now people will start to think, well, is lunch ever going to happen? But we've got another climb up, and we keep putting one foot in front of the other, Matt.
You mentioned these climbs, David, and coming up and down the hills and uphill and down dale, as we would say. I've heard people who've done the trek. I've obviously never done Kokoda myself, but I've heard people who've done the trek say some people have said the going down is in some ways harder than the going up. Where do you stand on that discussion?
I tend to agree. You're obviously working really hard when you're climbing up the hills, and your heart rate's up and you're puffing and panting. But when you go down, you're right. A lot of people say that it's even harder, especially on the knees, especially stopping yourself from falling over, because it is in places really, really steep. And if you take one wrong move with your feet, down you go on your bum. And I think I said it in one of the other podcasts, there's never a time I've walked the track where I haven't gone on my backside. It's going to happen. But in particular, your shins, your knees, your toes into the front of your boots as you're going down the hills, after a while it is monotonous, and you would almost wish to be climbing back up the hill, puffing and panting. So you've got to pick the lesser of two evils.
Keep those toenails short is the advice that I've heard as well, if you want them to remain attached to your feet.
Yes, many a toenail has been lost, turns black and falls off if you don't look after your feet, and your shoes, or boots rather, aren't properly fitting. So, yeah, we've got when we leave the village of Minari, we've got a climb. It's not a huge climb, and it comes up to a grassy gap in the top, which we would have already pointed out to everybody when we were coming down Brigade Hill. And in this area that we're in now, we've got to get off that feature and make our way down into what can be an unpleasant area. I could only imagine what it would have been like during the war, but it's a swamp, stagnant water. Lots of bugs and mozzies and stuff around, and you want to keep moving, and it smells, and if it's depending on the month of the year and how much rain it is, you're up over your ankles in mud. It conjures up those images that we think of Kokoda with men in mud. In fact, earlier this year, when I went up there without trekkers, we were up to our waistline in some of it because the bridges hadn't been. They've been repaired now, but they hadn't been repaired at the time. But this part is unpleasant to a certain degree, and I always like the fact that we can, it's motivation to get yourself out of it, and of course get up onto the next big mountain, which is the Maguli Range. So
we've talked about this, David, in previous episodes. Is that I don't want to be flippant and say we can understand what the men went through, because of course we can't get anywhere near understanding what they went through in 1942. But these things you're describing, to me, typify why we walk the ground, why we visit battlefields. When we talk about even silly things like keep your toenails trimmed, the effect that this trek is going to have on your feet, swamps, the smells of the jungle, the unpleasantness of the swamp and the water and the cloying mud. This is why we do it, isn't it, mate? You can read. I've got a whole bookshelf full of books about the Kokoda campaign. I can't tell you what it smells like to have to go through that swamp, or the pain of losing a toenail, or the desperation for a climb or a descent to end. And this is why we get out, not even just in these battlefields where it's an extreme physical challenge like Kokoda, but even walking, across a beautiful French, field to follow in the footsteps of the soldiers on the Somme, or through a jungle track in Vietnam. This is the reason we get out there, and this is the stuff you can't learn from the history books.
Indeed, and it really, for me, it puts it in perspective. Now, it's easy for me to sit here and talk about Kokoda because it's my subject. Obviously, done the track many times, read everything there is been written on it. But you're right, even when I go to other battlefields, which I'm not as familiar with, because I may have only been there once or twice, or I'm always excited when I go to a battlefield that I've never gone to before, and it is because I want to walk across the ground. I want to see what the dominating features are. And you gave the example of when you're on the Western Front. Unlike Kokoda, obviously Kokoda, you've got these big mountains, and you've got these points. Sometimes, I think of Fromelles, the Sugarloaf, those sorts of things. It's not as distinct, but nonetheless it is there. And I'm always reminded of the words of Ted Kenner VC, who said, the biggest battle in your life is a battle that you're in. And these parts of the ground mattered to the men who were fighting there, whether it's a huge big mountain or just a simple, indentation in the ground. At the time, in that moment, it really meant something, and they'll never forget that. And more often than not, especially only 80 years or 100 years after the battle, these things are still here. Sometimes, you've got to look for them, but you're right. That's something that the history book can't, give you the perfect picture in your mind. You have to be out there on the ground, and you have to experience it, and then overlay your own experience to say, well, yeah, look, I understand now. The enemy was coming from over here, and this particular spot meant something. In where we are now on the track in the swamp, it would have been awful for the men, especially when you've got the Japanese army chasing you and you have to hightail it. And if we put ourselves now down off the other side of that gap, you can look over to the village of Nunaru on the side. We've ducked down. We usually have lunch at a creek, a nice freshwater stream, which is on the edge of the swamp where we're coming through. We have lunch there because it's the last good water source, and then we head off back into the jungle. You can't really see too much of the mountains now because you've got lots of canopy, and you're going to be in the swamp area, and you must think to yourself, how would it have been trying to get men across there? And I mentioned earlier about the 2nd 27th who paralleled these tracks. And I always, if I think of it, I usually do. I have some milk arrowroot biscuits and some dried apricots, which I give to the trekkers, and I tell the story of the adjutant of the 2nd 27th, a guy named Harry Katakar, who was with those withdrawing South Australian officer with his men, trying to get back to the Australian lines, the Japanese on their tail, having to take an alternate route to escape, basically. And he was smart enough to look up in the treetops and see where the trees had the foliage at the top had burst. And if we remember about the supplies being dropped at Myola, in this swamp area, in a plane, it's not really that far. It's only a matter of minutes. He realised that some of the supplies that were dropped would have gone off target, and he managed to find and you imagine the relief that it would have been for them. Okay, milk arrowroot biscuits and dried apricots, but he's found some supplies that have gone astray. But imagine that. It would have meant the world to those guys. And, before we head off into the swamp, I usually give people a dried apricot and a milk arrowroot biscuit to remind them of the plight of the 2nd 27th and Harry Katakar.
Small comforts, mate. I'm sure they make a big difference. But the other thing your description does for me is it reminds me of the constants that apply through all wars and across all battlefields. And so obviously in Kokoda, it's fairly obvious when we're talking about the high ground and the importance of dominating the high ground. But that's a constant wherever you are. If you've been Waterloo in the 19th century, if you'd been on the Somme in 1916, if you'd been in the fields of Flanders in 1917, or scaling the heights of Gallipoli in 1915, these things would all apply. And whoever controls the high ground, from an infantry perspective at least, controls the battlefield. So fairly obvious in a place like Kokoda, where you've got these mountains towering over you, but it's a constant throughout warfare, throughout time.
Indeed. And on that note, we are moving through the swamp. We've got a big, we've got a huge mountain range to which I'll get to in a moment that we have to walk. But there's another river, the Brown River, named. I don't know if you can guess why, Matt, but it's named because of the colour that it was, and it's always a challenging crossing because the bridge usually consists of a felled tree, and I mean a big tree, or sometimes our guides or whoever the guides with you put up a rope line and you have to jump in and hang on to the rope line and ferry yourself across while the bags and all the equipment get across. And there is if anybody even Googled Kokoda Track Brown River, you'd actually see a log with Australian soldiers crossing it, relatively near to the spot. It does change a little bit, but it's time for people to cool off and have a little bit of a swim, depending on the conditions and the weather that we've got at the time. And then you start really getting into the sludgy muck. I mean, there's stuff there like quicksand. It was only in March this year where I jumped in where the bridge had run out and I ended up to my waist, and you could feel the other bridge under your feet. That's not there now. They've repaired the bridge, thankfully. But you've got mozzies in your ears. They sound like aeroplanes almost, and you've got these berries that just these fruit things, they're not edible, but they come off whatever the tree is, they drop, and all throughout the jungle, they're littering the jungle floor, and you can just hear them in the distance. All of a sudden, the mozzie sound will be broken by this almighty thump as these things fall onto the forest floor. But you've got all
sounds truly awful, David. I'm sure it's pretty magical, but it sounds truly horrific the way you're describing it.
Yeah, I know, but it is magical because thankfully the swamp is usually done during the day. So you in the middle of the day, as I said, we've just had lunch and it's flat. I mean, let's give it some credit. It's flat, and you do get a bit of a break of your wobbling knees going down, or you're puffing and panting going up, but eventually, after a couple of hours or so going, we break through from the swamp, and we're on the side of the mighty Maguli Range. And this range is mighty. It is a massive feature. I've crossed it a couple of times in one hit, but it is by anyone. And so, in fact, one of the Kokoda guidebooks talks about 9 false peaks. I don't know if I just can't count, or I haven't got the mental capacity when I'm climbing to count, because it feels more like 18 or 20 false peaks, which is a common occurrence of Kokoda. And it would have been, again, you could relay this experience to the soldiers in 1942. You think you're at the top. You think, I can see the blue sky. Yeah, get up the top of this, and I'm there. And You do, and you get there and it flattens out a little bit, and then you're looking back up at another patch of blue sky. I've got another one to go, and this repetitive goes on and on and on, and it does take its toll mentally more than physically because you're setting yourself up with false expectations. Oh, I'm almost there. Oh no, I'm not. Another one to go. In the end, you just give up counting them.
I hate to think what it's like after the mosquitoes and after the river crossings and the mud and the slush and the swamp and the swamp, and facing False Peak after False Peak. It's I'm sure there's people listening to this who are really looking forward to doing Kokoda. I'm delighting in the fact that I haven't had to do it so far. I'm sure it will be on the agenda in the future. But so we push on, as you know, as Winston Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going. So we push on. What next horrific geographic feature do we encounter, Dave?
Well, the monotony is broken up by the village of New Nauru. Nauru was down the bottom in the swamp area, existed there for, who knows, a long period of time, well before the war, and then it was decided that the village decided, hey, it might be a good idea to move out of the swampy area and come up on the side of the hill. It's got this wonderful red clay, and there's some wonderful contemporary photographs of looking back the opposite direction that we're going with the red clay. So much so that the red clay stands out. The village square, because village is clear areas. So, but it's this. Like Efogi was really almost volcanic in the sense it was black, sandy type soil, whereas this is this rich red clay. Almost looks almost outback Australia without if you've forgot about the jungle around you, but you can see it. It stands out. Back where before lunch, we would have come down to a lookout, and you can see it in the distance. So now we're out of the swamp. We've climbed up there. There's a church there. There's villages. It almost is like dare I say, a western. Earlier this year when I went in, the village had been unoccupied. The people hadn't had funds from the trekking industry, so they went off to do gold mining. The town had moved, and temporarily the people had unoccupied, but they'd locked their huts and that up, and it almost was like walking down the main street out of a western, with the dirt patch and in this case red clay. So that's the next thing you see. But after that, we leave that behind us, and we have to continue on up through I call them the mighty Magoolis, because they are literally never end, and you keep getting again those false peaks, and eventually you come up to this wonderful opening on the top of it, and it's covered by these spider webs that catch the dew and catch the rain and whatever. And if by this time we're there, it will be still quite sunny, and it sort of reflects on it. And I mean, again, you won't see too many spiders, but you see their webs. And this is what soldiers would have seen, and you can't help but finding a little bit of beauty in those things. And I'm sure the soldiers in 42 would have seen it as well. So after we do that, coming back to your point about going downhill, we've got a huge climb down off the Magoolis once you get to the top of them, and you can hear in the distance for a long time as you're walking along, and it gets louder and louder, which is the sound of water and a creek. That is Offie Creek, and eventually once you get down off the Magooli, and I don't want to fast forward over too much because it really is a mighty challenge, and it's littered, by the way, either side with weapons pits, so you can watch out like we did back in the earlier podcast when we talked about getting out of the area from Iora Creek Temperance Crossing. You'll start to notice weapons pits left and right of the track, and you're sort of on par with what the wartime track would have been. And when you finally get down to the bottom of the Magoolis, there's a bend in this creek, the creek that was that you could hear in the distance at Offie Creek, and that is there's this big rock there on the side that we're on at the moment as we cross it, and wartime photos show men crossing, Australian soldiers crossing in the same spot. In fact, when you do cross it, there's a little guest house just up on the other side of the hill as you climb out, and we're at the back now heading towards Ioribaiwa Ridge. But that was the site of an Australian ambush, famously done, where Australian soldiers threw bully beef tins into the Offie Creek, and they floated down. They waited for one of the Japanese to come down and get them, and then when more came down, they ambushed them from up on this high point. Remember, at this stage, the Australians are still in the fighting withdrawal. They're still trying to make their way back, and they end up doing that. They go to where we're going for our night stay, and that's to the Ioribaiwa area. We're on our way now to Ioribaiwa village, And we've still got some climbing to do, Matt. We've come out of the creek. We've made our way up the top. There's gum trees, believe it or not. There is gum trees growing in this area. We start to see quite a few of those as we go from this area on. And kunai grass, they will actually be quite hot and dry in parts, depending on the season. But yeah, big climbs, more false peaks, not as many as the Maguli, and steeper in places, but shorter. And of course, when we get into the Ioribaiwa area, this is a time now where the Australians start to. Brigadier Potts' 21st Brigade is coming off the track, the 39th and 53rd from the 30th Brigade are relieved, and we're going to have more new Australian brigades come and start fighting the Japanese, and we start to get to the point where things aren't not quite where we are on the track just yet, but they're going to turn the tables for the Australians before they start pushing them back. And in particular, I want to mention the 25th Brigade under the command of Brigadier Ken Ether. They get a new fresh Australian troops in as a whole brigade. In fact, they're bigger than brigade because they have the 3rd Militia Battalion attached to them, and they are now poised to take the fight to the Japanese. Although the Japanese are still coming, they're coming up all through this area that we're walking along at the moment, heading to Ioribaiwa Ridge.
It's exciting stuff, David. It's I'm not sure which one I'm more fascinated by, the current trials and tribulations of walking across the track, or the knowledge that I'm surrounded by so much history. It's just an incredible part of the track. Is this part of the track that you think is richer in history than other parts, or is there a significant part of the track that really stands out to you in that regard?
This area here, I mean, we've mentioned a lot of the places, Isarava, of course, Kokoda and Daniki, those early battles, and we were talking earlier about Brigade Hill, but in this area, it changes a couple of things. One happens is that you start to get a sense that the jungle has changed, that the ground is starting to change. So it physically looks different because obviously we're cutting across the Owen Stanleys. It changes in parts. So it's significantly different. I think by the time you get there, you actually stop and take a pause for a moment and go, okay, yeah, look, there are gum trees. The landscape is a bit different here. But also from the historical point of view, you've got a whole chapter, if you will, of the involvement of Brigadier Potts' 21st Brigade involvement to being relieved by these, a whole fresh Australian brigade. In fact, the whole Kokoda campaign, as we know, is dominated by high ground, dominated by ridges. And this is a place where now you realise, hey, we've just come, 3/4 or more over the Kokoda Track. The Japanese have been pursuing the Australians after 2 major battles. Yes, it's running, I guess, in their favour, but their supply line is dragged well out all the way from Kokoda back to the northern beachheads. It's really dragged its way, and sure, they get some Australian supplies, but it's not a huge amount. Their supply line is coming all the way from the north coast of Papua. They're some 200 odd kilometres really away from their main base at Girawa, down in the northern beaches, Popondetta, where we would have flown in on the plane when we started our journey. And yeah, landscape changes, the history changes, and it starts, you as a trekker start to feel that you're getting closer, you're getting on top of walking the track, and it's only a couple of nights now before you're back in the comforts of the hotel. So in your mind, the emotion, the history overlap with your walking and your own fatigue. It starts, I think, to gel. And I must mention, because you asked me, Matt, about the history being more relevant in this area. Well, there at Ioribaiwa Ridge, when we get to the ridge line itself, before we drop down into the village, there is I think it's one of the best kept secrets. People get tired and they keep walking, but it's relatively, you don't have to do a big climb to go and see it. And what I'm getting at is that you can duck off to the side. There's this wonderful big tree which must have been there during the war, just before you drop down the track. We're on this flat area, if you will. Everyone always has a rest there, and you can duck off down to the right where we're going, so to our right in the direction we're heading, and you can walk along part of the ridge line, and it is amazing. It is, okay, there's not concrete pillboxes and that to see on Kokoda, and you see the odd 1 or 2 weapons pits that we mentioned either side of the track. But in this area, there's a high concentration of what Japanese trench systems, and they were literally into trenches round. You know, you always distinguish the Japanese and being sort of a round shape as compared to the rectangular shape of the Australians. But in this area, you have this interlocking system of trenches and foxholes that the Japanese had dug into, and you know, you recall stories where the Japanese, as I said, their supply line was so stretched that, you know, men were in these foxholes scratching around for single grains of rice. I mean, it was a desperate situation now for the Japanese.
Just horrific. And as we've said all along, we should never forget the hardships the Japanese went through as well, not just out of human compassion, but also to paint a fuller picture of the history. We don't do ourselves any favours by simply thinking of the Japanese as this two-dimensional enemy, sort of a shadow in the background. They were men as well. They had to go through the same hardships in terms of food and supply and all these things that affected armies. So that paints a picture, not just, as I said, from a human aspect, but also from a logistics aspect of why campaigns succeed and fail. So probably a very good spot to do that. Pushing on, what are we coming up to next?
Well, yeah, so we're going to drop down for our night stay at Ioribaiwa village, which is just below that ridge line. I should mention here, because I had mentioned I'd introduced Ken Ether's 25 Brigade. So he has 3 infantry battalions, plus he has a militia battalion attached to him. But in this spot here, he literally gets on the phone because he knows that the position of Ioribaiwa is untenable for several reasons, but mainly that he's obviously only come up from Owers Corner, so the opposite way that we're going, and he's come Owers Corner, Imita Ridge, and then Ioribaiwa Ridge, and he thinks, I can't defend Ioribaiwa Ridge, but I can defend Imita, and he gets on the phone to his higher command and asks, permission to withdraw, and he gets it, but his higher says to him, look, you're not going to withdraw any further. You're going to have to take a stand and, if necessary, die there. And so you've got the Japanese digging in, you've got the Australians withdrawing back to the other ridge line, and we're going to drop down almost in the halfway mark, if you will, to stop and have our night's camp in Ioribaiwa. And the village itself, again, nice, wonderful open space, and you can look. You can't see Port Moresby. You can look back towards Port Moresby, and the sun sets there in the evening on the grass, this big open grass field. There's a lovely memorial, relatively new, I guess, in the history of trekking on Kokoda, this wonderful memorial that you can gather around. It's got like this 3D maps of the Kokoda track with all the points, including where we are, and you can enjoy not only rest, but this wonderful, the sky does, paints all these different colours and that come up. It's absolutely stunning. It's a highlight for me of the trip, to be honest with you.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our adventure, David. What's still in front of us after this overnight camp?
Lovely overnight camp, but just when we thought that we can taste hamburger and chips back at the hotel, not quite. We've still got one night on the track, and where we're going now is we haven't got much of a walk to drop off the Ioribaiwa side of the ridge, but then we hit a creek or several creeks, one big one in particular, and again, like the book said, that there was 9 false peaks of coming up Maguli. It gives a figure on how many times you cross the same creek, but it just seems to go on and on and on. And actually, in my mind, I can recall the last time I did it when we got unusual. Usually the rain comes in the afternoon, but this day it started quite earlier in the morning, and it just absolutely hammered down rain, so you're completely soaking wet. This area, I say to people, there's no taking. It's not like the Brown River that we've just gone through the day before, where you can take your shoes off and wade across. If you took your shoes off every time you had to cross this creek as the track weaves its way and snakes its way through, you'd never get anywhere. And it's dangerous actually to take your boots off because you need the grip on the end of your shoes. So people woke up in the morning, nice dry socks. They might have been saving a pair, but no, they're going to get wet pretty quick. So jump into the creek, both boots on, I say, and just keep walking. And we do this for quite some time. And if you're lucky, you haven't got the rain, but you'll be wet from your feet up to your knees, and then you'll be wet if if it rains. And there's canopy, and you're down. It's quite dark. Even in the day, it gets dark in some of these spots. And you're in no man's land because the area between Ioribaiwa and Imita during the war, both sides did send out patrols to gather information, if you will. The Japanese had other things going on in their command structure. They were now at the end of their tether, I guess. They had, as I said, stretched themselves out, but the Australians were up on Imita Ridge, and they were, sending patrols out into this, what I call it, no man's land, because you've got both sides having a face-off on where we just slept at Ioribaiwa and where we're heading. And when you finally get through all these snaking the river and the creeks and that, and you get through, you start to get this volcanic style rocks where it's all little rocks inside a big rock. You can see it. It's very distinct. Again, the landscape changes. But then you're in the shadow of Imita Ridge. And it, for me, Matt, I can tell you now, is my Achilles heel. I don't like it. I don't like climbing up it from this side.
Tell us why, David. I mean, you've had innumerable peaks that have caused you problems. What's special about this one?
I think I liken it to if you get a puppy, you show the puppy early on that you can outrun it, and even though when it grows into a fully grown-up dog and it can outrun you, in its mind it still thinks that you can outrun it. And what happened for me once is that I'd actually crossed this is many years ago now, in the wet season. I think it was the 2nd of January. I set off going the same direction we're going, and I crossed the Maguli Range, the swamp, the Maguli Range, and Ioribaiwa and Imita all in one day. And I remember it was and it rained the whole time. And Imita being the last big hill of that particular trek for me, it just went on and on and on because it is steep. It's not as long as others, but it twists and turns. And just when you think you get to the top, then it gives you another bit. And for me, like being that young puppy, it's one place that always just says, hang on, you think you're something special, think you can walk the Kokoda Track, well, think again. And it just it's good to be out of the creeks, snaking the creeks and being wet, but it is literally there is a nice water point to pick up water at the base of it, and you are just looking up at a sheer wall to begin with, and then it twists off to the right and it twists again, and it seems to go on forever. It's actually not as big as Brigade Hill if you're coming up, especially going the opposite direction we're going, but it is just, I think it just emerges, Matt, it's the right place but at the wrong time.
I'm just trying to imagine being a Japanese private, lugging mortar shells and ammo belts and my own rifle, and then looking up at this this huge geographic feature in front of me. Do we have many accounts from the Japanese perspective of the hardships of climbing these hills and dealing with the jungle?
There isn't a lot, I guess, that's made it into, dare I say, popular history or the Kokoda books. There are certainly some well-written accounts which have delved into the Japanese records and give accounts for it. But there is certainly a system there where of us when we write the history. You hear it. The history is written by the victors, but there is a couple of good books out that I suggest that if people want to seek them out, to go and have a look at the at the Japanese side of it. And back to what I said before, where the Japanese were dug in on their furthest extent, which is the Ioribaiwa Ridge, where they talk about scratching for single grains of rice being completely dysentery, malaria, starving, hungry, miserable, all that sort of stuff. And it was and their army, I guess, for all accounts, with the discipline was I'm not saying we weren't disciplined, but certainly the Japanese, by all accounts that I've read, it was, if you were a private soldier, you would certainly be let us say have different standards of discipline than ours, or the way it would be enforced. So I can't help now but to think about how hard it would have been at this stage of the campaign for the Japanese soldier.
Absolutely. We're nearly at the end. Our hardy band of trekkers has nearly done it. What do we still have to challenge ourselves before we get there?
Well, we're up in Imita, and usually it's the afternoon. And if you haven't got rain, of course it's going to rain. It gets quite muddy. There's like an open saddle on top of Imita, and there's again a fairly recent plaque that's been put up there. It's quite an impressive plaque which talks about um, the, um, the campaign at this stage, whether you're going the opposite direction, going the way we're going. But everyone has you've climbed Imita, we've had a drink of water, and we drop down. And if it's raining, which undoubtedly, let's say it is raining because it will be raining, you hit mud and you're sliding down, and it goes on for a bit, going off the other end of it, and it's not as steep to begin with, and you almost have to climb up a little bit to go down. I know that's a hard concept to grasp, but you're actually climbing up to go down, and finally, when you get through to the bottom of Imita, and this is usually the last campsite on the track itself before going home the next day, you get to a place called Goodwater, and no prizes for guessing why it's called Goodwater. It's got a lovely water supply there. There's a place you can have a swim. It's cleared and open, and it's there's a nice grass area there, and it's a good opportunity to obviously have a rest because you're on your second last day's walking, but it's time for reflection. And most groups that I take, by the time we get here, the talk changes around the campfire. We're still talking a bit about the history, but we're also reflecting on our own journey and, I guess working out how we've coped with the trek, coped with the emotion of what happened, 80 years ago, and also people's own, I guess, aspirations of what they're going to do when they're finished. And that wouldn't have been that unlike what Australian soldiers or the human spirit goes through when you're doing something hard and you're thinking about greener pastures, shall we say.
Yeah, I'm certainly not surprised by that, David. What's left to tackle before we finish the track?
So we've had our night at Goodwater. We are going across the stream that we would have got our drinking water and swam downstream from it, and morale improves because in the morning you wake up and you're and we know it's going to be the last day. We know there's going to be a bus waiting for us, and that's exactly what happens. People start getting, I guess, they've all got niggling little, whether it be a blister on your boot or you've got some chafing from your pack or you're just tired or whatever. Morale sort of lifts, but it's not over yet, and we've got the best part of the morning walking, and eventually, as you pop through, there's you've got a couple of areas where there were supply dumps, but you're going to be met by the last major feature other than Noah's Corner, and that is the Goldie River. And there's no bridges over the Goldie River. We jump in and we wade up to our waists and across the stream. You start to also get a sense of all the porters that are with us. They get excited because they know they're heading off to the Silver City, the Port Moresby, and you'll often see the boys will start, getting their gear out and start washing it and doing all those sorts of things, and they'll have a clean up, I guess, and we'll put our boots back on because you do take your boots off in this spot, and we've got one last hill to climb. And different to Imita because you've got a bit of morale, it's going to go, but I think people get themselves into a false expectation that it's already over, and it's not. And it's a 45-minute to an hour climb, and it becomes really open, and it's quite sunny on the Moresby end, and you get to a point where you can see the archways, which are similar in design to the archways that we would have stood under and had our photo taken right back at the start of the journey at Kokoda. And you'll start to be climbing up this zigzag track and the sun is beating down. You can see this archway. It's there. You've got this, sense that I want to complete it. But of course, you're only as good as what you can go up the hill. You're puffing and panting and you're stopping. Oh, it's so close. It's so close. And then eventually you'll start to hear some of the local people. They might sing out "Oro, Oro, Oro," which is their one of their welcomes. And then you get to the archways and there's patch of green grass. There's some interpretive panels. It's quite open there, and there's a 25-pounder actually under a sort of a shed that they've built there. And you get there, and there's just relief, and you can hear, instead of those fruits that I was talking about dropping from the top of the canopy down, the sound you can hear is the dropping of people's packs because off they go, and you're done and you're finished. And there is just such I guess a sense of accomplishment, which it's even now. I'm in my head. I'm picturing being there, and although I've done it dozens and dozens of times, if you've done it for the first time, that sense of achievement, that sense of accomplishment, is something that a moment in time that is hard to repeat. It's just a glorious feeling, I guess.
Just extraordinary, David. I can imagine the sense of camaraderie and the sense of accomplishment that comes over you at that moment when you've completed the track. I think it would be disbelief would also be part of the experience. But just to finish up, we jump on the bus. We're heading back to Port Moresby. We're going to make one last very important stop at Bomana War Cemetery. Tell us a little bit about that. We probably won't have time to go into every grave that we would visit when we're there, but just give us an overview of that cemetery and why it's so significant.
Yeah, so we get on the bus and we make our way from Owers Corner. I should point out that we go past McDonald's Corner as well, which for a lot of the units, that was a significant spot because that was their step-off point before Owers Corner was developed during the war. But yeah, you're right. We go through Sigari and we drop down. We've got a big, long, windy drive down heading towards Port Moresby, and we call into Bomana. And when you said before, Matt, about that sense of accomplishment, and it is rightly deserved by Australians crossing, going under that archway, and they should be proud of themselves, and they have that sense of it. And I think everyone at this stage, we're all on a high. We know we're going back. No more walking back to the hotel. But when you get to Bomana, you got to understand, Port Moresby in places very underdeveloped. You start to drive into the gates, and the driveway that comes in now is just reveals. It's like this long winding driveway that you'd see in a big manor house or something. But when you come around this winding corner at Bomana, you're just faced with this scene of Commonwealth war graves. And if anybody listening has been to the Western Front, Matt, and I know you have many cemeteries on the Western Front. You see those white stone headstones, I should say. That's what you see at Bomana. And look, there is lots of Australians and male and female, and you've got not just people that were killed in the Kokoda campaign. You've got Northern Beaches as well. There's only 3 cemeteries in Papua New Guinea. There's one in Lae, one up in Rabaul, and the big one here is in Bomana. And we always go through it up to the rotunda at the top, where the names of those that have no known grave are written. Men like Sam Templeton that I mentioned before, or those that have. And they may very well be buried in Bomana because there's lots of headstones that say known unto God. And of course, they may be in there, but we're not sure. They haven't been identified, but their name is on Rotunda. They may not even be in Bomana at all. There's 2 grave headstones there, which will have the Victoria Cross on it. One is Jack French from the Milne Bay campaign, and of course Bruce Kingsbury from Ioribaiwa that we would have walked through. But and you've got the Manusu brothers buried next to each other, which I think we covered in an earlier podcast. But one of the graves in particular, which I must mention, which I take especially school groups, we go there. There is a grave to a guy named Joe Rawkin. I know his story as Joe Rovkin. He changed his name during the war because he was Jewish. He thought he was going to go and fight the Germans, but he ended up at a 16-year-old on the track. And to my knowledge, he is the youngest Australian soldier that was killed on the Kokoda campaign, and he is buried there. And I take people, clearly see the Star of David on the grave, and I single him out because of his age, and he's 16, and it puts things in perspective because most people that walk the track are over 16. So even if you've got a school group, year 10, year 11, etc., they've already lived longer than Joe. And to stand at his grave and to ponder the fact that it could have been you, it could have been your generation, and surrounded by all these other graves of men who died in the Kokoda campaign, you are, if that doesn't ring at home, it is. I can only express this to you, Matt. You've got that jubilation as you went through those archways, and then when you get to Bomana, you're not walking, but the emotion takes over, and it's very rare I have somebody there that doesn't have salt water welling in their eyes, Matt.
Just extraordinary, David. At Bomana, I believe, there's more Australians buried there than any other military cemetery in the world. So there's often a debate between Tyncott in Belgium from the First World War and Bomana. But as far as I understand, Bomana has more Australians than any other military cemetery on the planet. So that certainly would bring it home at the end of a long trek. And what a remarkable way to finish after the physical exertion. I think at times on the track, I assume that the physical challenges outweigh somewhat the history, that you're busy just trying to put one foot in front of another, and the sense of accomplishment, as you say, when you get to the end. But what a remarkable way to put it into perspective, to then see those thousands of graves of the blokes that did exactly what you've just done, except never came home. Just what a remarkable part of the world, remarkable journey. You must never tire of it, David.
I don't. And if the body tires, the mind will never tire of it. You've summed it up well there, Matt. I mean, if you to have undertaken this, I think the ultimate Australian pilgrimage for several reasons, but obviously one, because it is, you have to deprive yourself. You have to really go on a true pilgrimage to be able to feel, touch, and smell the battlefield. But and then to go through Bomana and to see the sacrifice that Australian soldiers made for us is just extraordinary. And I can't tire of it. And every time I go to New Guinea, I learn something. I'll read something new. I'll go and see a different little aspect of it, or focus or concentrate on that. And of course, as we said earlier on in this podcast, when you get people who are like school age children, or not just school, anyone that's got a genuine want to know more about it, it brings me alive, and the articulation of the history, it does. I can't express on this podcast how excited I get. All of these images coming through my mind as we talk. There is just, I think, if you haven't done it, go and do it. And if you can't do it, as in the physical side of it, you can still come and visit PNG. You can still come and visit Kokoda. You can go to the northern beachheads. You can go to Owers Corner. And most importantly, as you said, Matt, biggest cemetery Australians, you can come and see Bomana.
Well, it's very well said, David. And if you are listening to this and you do want to do the track, don't forget you can do it with David or one of his talented team members, and you can book through Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours. So David touched on it there, but we have a couple of innovative tours we've put together with David that allow you to fly into Kokoda and do basically the start and the end of the track. Obviously, you don't do the bits in the middle, but you can do the start and the end and see those key battlefields without having to trek, which is something relatively new in the marketplace. But of course, if you're feeling up for it, do the whole trek. Join David and walk in the footsteps of those Anzacs, and it's a remarkable journey. In spite of my joking around, David, I'm looking forward to getting over there with you and doing it sometime in the very near future. And obviously, there'll be a number of podcasts about that once we've done it, but something I'm looking forward to in the future. But David, what a remarkable journey, mate. I'm sad it's come to the end after 3 hours. We've compressed a 10-day journey into 3 hours, but what a remarkable 3 hours it's been. I just want to say thank you, mate. Thanks for your compassion, your enthusiasm, and your ability to bring this to life. It's been an extraordinary journey.
Thanks, Matt. And if you're looking forward to doing the track, it's not as much as I'm looking forward to pushing you across the track, my friend.
I can and yet can't wait. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Matt.